So you can create an inner class here, but I actually don't like doing that. So I'm going to keep everything separate. So I'm going to create a Java class just like that. So go click on your source, right click on your source, go to new and click on Java class. Once again, right click on source, new Java class. And here I'm actually just going to create a class called student. So the name of my object will be student. I'm going to hit enter and that's created just like that. So now I can come to my main. So I have main.java and student.java. They're right next to each other. So I can come into my main. I can do something like this. So student, I'll just give it my name, equals new student. If I can spell it right. Just like that. I can create an object of any student's name. That object doesn't have any properties, doesn't have anything in there. It's useless, but I can actually create an object. If I wanted to add some functionality to this object, I can add string name of the student, and I can do int student ID. So now I have attributes. I have so those are known as attributes. We'll go over that later in this course as well. So we have the name, and we have student ID, which is the integer. And now if I go back to my main class, let me actually delete this for a minute. So control exit, I'll put it back in a minute. But if I do smart dot, this actually gives me a bunch of functions that are not no use to me right now. These are coming from higher level of object class. So all these functions wouldn't work. It doesn't have any attributes. It doesn't have any built-in functions that I can actually use. So it's giving me a generic list of functions I could use. Now, if I add all the functions attributes in there, now if I go to student and do student dot, the name of the object dot, I get name and student ID. Is that going to make sense? You have student dot name equals to, I can just set my name. So here, what I did right here, I don't have to call it student. I can just call it student one, and I actually wouldn't know what student that is. And if I set the attribute of that, that's how I know that's student one. I mean, that's the name of the student is Usman. I can also set the student one dot student ID. So we'll write some for this class as well. So the first thing we actually need a constructor. So every object that you're going to be writing, make sure you have a constructor in there. You can have multiple constructor. We'll get into that next this Thursday. But constructor, that you should always have a default constructor. So default constructor would be something like this. So you would write so you would write the name of the object. So it would be public student. So default constructor would be setting the name of the student as they pass it in. So let's say these items are required for this object to be created. So you would do string let's call this let's call this not name, but new. And then we have int new student ID. So in the constructor, all you need to do is name equals to new name. And then student ID equals to new student ID. So one problem, what is that one problem? Oh, so it's giving me one problem that this right here, what you're creating here shouldn't be like this. So now we have a default constructor, which actually takes parameters. So it's taking a name and a student ID. So let me actually delete the constructor. I'll put it back in a minute. So if you already typed it in, go ahead and just control exit. I just want to show you something. So now I didn't have any default constructors. So it was letting me declare a student without declaring the name and a student ID right there. So if I wanted to print it out, so what I can do is system dot out dot print ln, and I can do student one dot name. And student ID. And I actually want to do student. I'm just using concatenation to print all this out. So the way you would get those attributes would be just calling them. The student one, that's the student one. And what do you want from it? You want name or student ID? So I'll put in name and student ID. So if I print it out, if I run it, I get student name is Usman, and I need a space right there. And the student ID is whatever this ID that I set. So if you have a main object that you created here, this main would be considered as a user. So the user is accessing the object that you created. And for user to access the name and the student ID field like this, it is not safe. So they can set what students don't know, that they can actually try to set something like this. And they'll keep getting an error and they wouldn't know what to do. So this is giving users a lot of power to work with your code. You don't want to do that. So you gotta restrict the user. So you can set all these fields to private. So the students don't have access. I'm sorry, not students. Users don't have access to it. As soon as I set these to private, these names right here, name and student ID, they're only visible, they're only accessible within this student class. They're not accessible outside of that class. So the main method does not have access to these. So if I do student one dot, those two things are gone now. That's where the getters and setters come in. We use getters and setters method to access all the fields. So these are attributes and fields, also known as fields. So giving access to your attributes and fields to the user is not a good idea. You'll learn more about that later as we do more harder examples, but you don't want to give users a lot of power to change or write code that affects your object class. Right. So how would they actually set it now? They can set it. I'm going to delete all this. delete this. They can set this using the constructor, and we can write getters and setters method. So now we have a constructor. How would they declare the name? They would declare it here. So that would be name, and student ID would be something like this. So now the question comes in, how would they print it out now? How would they know what the name of the student is? Right now, they don't have that luxury. So right now, let me see if Java is smart enough. If I do toString and run it, what would happen? Yeah, so it's actually giving you a memory of that location of that object. So this is the memory location inside the computer that I have, and where it is stored. It's not actually giving you what the name and student ID is. Like I said, I don't have any way to print the student. So this toString method, I don't have it here. I do need to write a toString method for this object to be printed. So I can do it something like this. So the toString method would be static, yeah, static. And this would return string. And that would be toString, call it toString. And toString, this is where you define how your object will be printed. So before we had Control Z, like that. So I want my object to be printed in this format. I don't think this is working to stay caught up with what you're saying. Okay, yeah. So that I'm just going to copy that, the same line, print statement, and just do Control X and Control V. So in here, I actually don't need student one. I can access the name variable just like that. And I don't need student one. I can just access the variable just like that. And let's see. And I would actually need a return and not a print, because this actually returns it. I'm getting red on name. I'm sorry, so I actually don't need a static keyword here. Static is used if you write methods inside the main class. If you write methods inside the objects, you actually don't need a static method, the static keyword. We'll go over what static and non-static methods are, but you wouldn't be writing static methods inside the object. There are some cases you would need static methods, but most of the time you won't need the static keyword here. All right. So now this is how I want a student, my object, to be printed. Now if I come in here and I have something like this, print statement, I delete this, and if I do student1 dot toString and run it again, it goes into my student object and sees this method toString and returns this string, and it prints it just like that. All right. So even if I don't do toString and just type in the name of the object, it would go in. Yeah, it would go in and find the toString method so you should always have fields, attributes, constructor. You can have multiple constructors. Constructors. I'll show you how that's going to work on Thursday. I'm trying to keep it simple. The main things you need to create an object. So fields and attributes, constructor. You need toString method. You should always have a toString method. That just defines how your object will be printed. And that toString method, you actually don't need to call it. You just print the object, and it goes in and finds that toString method and prints it. Right. Everything's good so far. All right. So next thing you should always have is the getters and setters. So you need getters and setters methods to access your fields. So getters are just accessing your field. So you would need public and the return value, this would be string, and get name. So this getters and setters, and this would be known as getters. So get name, and you need the same thing for get student ID. So the only thing you need to do inside of these is just to keep it simple, you would just return name. And here you just return student ID. And same thing you need, I'm going to copy this. Actually, you guys might get confused. So I'm not going to copy it, I'll just type it in. Do you need setters? Setters are just complete opposite of getters. And you need public. You don't have a return. And all you're doing is setting the name. So you do string, new name. And in here, what you do is name equals to new name. And you need public void set student ID. And in here, you need new student ID. So these are getters. You need one for each of your fields. And these are setters. You need one for each of your fields. So doing getters and setters, that depends on you. If you want if you want to give access to the user to be able to set it. If you don't want to give access to the user to be able to set or update something, you can just delete it, or you can just set these to private. And then the user on the main doesn't have access to it. All right, so now we have getters and setters. Let's say we got student one, and we declared the name and ID, and let's say we need to we run it and we print name and student ID, but we only want to print the name. What we can do is we can do student one dot get student name, and we can get the name just like that, and we can just print it. And later in the code, let's say you want to update the name of the student. So we can do set name, and we can pass in a new name. Let's say so I'm going to use the name whoever messaged me last. So I'm going to update the name to Quinlan, and I'm going to print it afterwards and to see if it was updated. So first it was Usman, and then it was Quinlan. So by writing setters and getters, you have more control of what you want the user to do. So let's say here, you want to set the new ID, this user wants to set the new ID. You can restrict the user to, let's say you have the ID has to be over certain numbers. So let's say 5,000 numbers. So you can set ID to 1. You can set that restriction here. So right now I don't have any restriction, so I can set the student ID to whatever I want. I started with 1, 2, 5, 4, 6, 8. I can set it to student 1 dot set ID to 1. And if I print it, that will update it because I don't have any restrictions. Get student ID. The student ID was updated to 1. But let's say I don't want that. I can set a restriction here. If a new student, that ID that's coming in is greater than 50,000. 50,000. That's when you set it. Otherwise, don't set it. Else system dot out that we can tell the user what you're trying to do is not allowed. Student ID has to be greater than 50,000. So by setting setters and getters, you have more control of what you want the student or the user to do. So if I run this now, so the name is updated, but the student ID is not updated. I get a message. Student ID has to be greater than 50,000, but why am I getting this? Oh, right here. Okay, this would make more sense. Print ln, I'm going to print on the new line. It was right next to each other. That's what was happening. All right. So it has to be greater than 50,000, and the student ID is set to whatever the old was. It wasn't updated.